5:36, we'll call the meeting to order, please. Clint, would you give us invocation, please?
Bow our heads and pray.
Improve our community, please bless our citizens and our city leadership, give this community guidance and understanding in all matters discussed.
And now join us for flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Thomas Newsom.
Here.
Whitney Kerr.
Here.
Clint Horner.
Here.
Shane Knight.
Here.
Drew Jackson.
Here. First order of business under consent items is consider approval of regular minutes for June 27th, 2023.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. If you would call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsom.
Yes.
Whitney Kerr.
Yes.
Clint Horner.
Yes.
Shane Knight.
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Moving to the public hearing section, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2023-16, a plan unit development and preliminary plat request for property located near Lindenwood Drive and Thomas Circle. Before we begin, this is Miss O'Neill's last time with us, so I just want to give a moment and some appreciation for you and years that you spent bettering our community. So thank you for the service. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. This is a PUD preliminary plat request. This is the one that was tabled from the June 27th meeting. Staff did some research as requested to find out that all streets within the Linden Woods development is public streets with the exclusion of the existing Linden Woods Drive. That is a private road. Some of the requests that staff has asked and have been talking to the owners about is making that existing piece of Linden Woods public as long as the curbs are fixed and the cracks in the pavement are sealed, then they'll accept that as a public street. We did confirm that the easement that is existing does cover where the water and sewer lines are and all that, so that will be covered, so there's no additional easement would be needed. The other ask was to have the existing Thomas Circle and a segment of Thomas Way to be private, and then the water meters to be changed over to a master meter type system. And then some drainage that was to be fixed at Matthew and Thomas Way. That is kind of the asks. We've talked to the property owners, and he was open to those ideas. I'll let him comment further if he would like. The staff doesn't have any other comments or anything other than that. We'll just move forward. If you have any questions or comments, happy to answer anything.
Any questions for Ms. O'Neill? Would the applicant like to speak?
I don't have to speak if you're ready to move forward on the approval. No, thank you for being, I'm glad to be here again. Thank you for considering it one more time. We were just a little bit off on some information last time, so I'm glad that we were able to clear up some things. We've had some discussions with city staff and with Public Works. I guess the point is the city staff met to discuss that Lindenwood Drive. I have this little, I don't know if this is helpful, but so all of the green in there are the streets of the Linden Woods community. The light green being the current portion of Linden Woods Drive that's constructed. The green, where it goes into the green, that is not constructed Linden Woods Drive, but that was the ask for that to be public as part of the preliminary plat and PUD. As you can see, the rest of them, we have confirmed that everything else is public. So that would be abutting all public access. So city staff is saying that they would be willing, because there's one water line in that, where, right next to Linden Woods Drive in the right of way. It's covered in the right of way, that they would be willing to take that public. They would like to see the Thomas Circle, that was our last phase, go back to private. And there was, I guess, two reasons for that. One, that was kind of looks like and acts like a parking lot, because we have the on-street parking there. And also the water meter, city is really trying to get through, trying to take all apartments with one single meter, and that makes sense. The water lines run under the concrete and things like that of the sidewalks, and the city is tired of going onto private property and fixing all of those things if they have to go through the water lines. That makes sense. We're not disputing any of that kind of thing. So we're open for sure to those kind of things, if that kind of is what's helping us to get approval for these next phases. Obviously, the next phases would be, the right of way would be 60 feet on going forward on Linden Woods. There would be single meters on the rest of the apartments, single water meters. It adheres to the rest of all of the city codes. And there would be an access off of that Thomas Circle. It would still be, I mean, it could be private, but it would still, they would still have access, so that we're having multiple accesses for all of the apartments that are going in there. That was pretty much the discussion, which we are for sure can entertain and are open to and can move forward with those. I don't feel like that's a really huge issue. Once we have contractors on site, we have their attention, we can get things fixed and turned over very easily. And I think probably in order to make those, we'd have to discuss with the city attorney, but I think just a quick replat to show the public to private or the private to public, or amended plat basically for those roadways. I don't think that would be a difficult thing.
This may be a question for Ms. O'Neill. I'm not sure. Has there been any discussion in terms of where on Thomas Way we're going to draw the line in terms of public and private? I know that there was a small excess, so that it
yes.
would, abut a public right.
Where Joe Bullard and Thomas Way, but
Yeah, on where the little circle is, where it comes down and meets in
Okay.
Joel Bullard. Yeah.
Just want to make sure that had been something that was discussed. I know we had questioned it at some point, so, okay. Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you again for working with us and meeting some of the requests. I appreciate it.
For sure. It's all for the betterment of the community, for sure.
Thank you. Mr. Markham, do you mind if I drag you into the discussion on, I think there's still maybe some question in terms of what process, how do we move forward from here in terms of process and identifying kind of the items of compromise and going from public to private. So should the request that's been agreed to, should that become a part of the PUD documents, or how do we document what that agreement is?
I think it could become part of the PUD documents, and to the extent we need to modify an existing plat, to just reflect public to private, I don't think that would be a difficult process at all. I think it would still have to come through this body and go back through city council, but I think it would, I can't imagine that would be problematic. It's really just checking the box from one of the requirements in the PUD.
Is there any need to document some of the repair of the streets or review of drainage, master metering the multifamily, that sort of stuff?
I would say yes maybe yes to all of it. Certainly there needs to be some sort of agreement, whether it's as part of the PUD or just make any building permits contingent upon the fulfilling of those requirements. I really haven't thought about how to put those into, but I guess it could be put into the PUD language and both parties sign off on it. I mean, the PUD's sort of an agreement between the city and the developer anyway, so that could be made part of that, and any building permits are contingent with following those requirements.
Is that something we could have ready for the council meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be easy.
I think that'd be helpful.
Okay.
You guys have anything? Thanks, appreciate it. Is there anyone who would like to speak for or against?
The way our financing goes is that we're not like a for sale developer where we can put in the infrastructure and then we go get different loans and lots for, we're not a for sale paper lot kind of development company. We get all the financing, the construction loan, the permanent loan, because it's an apartment, the investor, all of so the money comes in all at one time, so it makes it a little hard on us to have to put in infrastructure differently than building permits and things like that. All I'm asking is that we can maybe not make it a condition of the building permits, just because I'm trying to get maybe more like certificates of occupancy or something like that. It's just a timing issue for us. We can't close until we have some of these things. We run into timing issues because of the tax credits, and we're fully on board to get these things done, but there is some timing with having to go again through planning and zoning and through, if we can keep the other phases moving in addition to doing this at the same time, that would be very helpful, just for your consideration.
I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. I think that's just fine. There's nothing magical about building permit phase or occupancy phase, as long as it's clear in the agreement that it will be done before the project is released.
Sounds good, thank you both. Would anyone else like to speak? Any discussion?
I think it's worth noting that, I mean, it's written in our packet, but it may be worth acknowledging publicly that the city's civil engineer has noted about needing hydrology studies done on your pre and post development runoff. So we need to make a note that's turned in with building applications and that sort of thing. Yeah, well, before the final plat for sure, yeah.
So are we looking at if we vote to approve this, are we needing to put some specific conditions in that approval at this point tonight? In the motion itself? And do we have those specifically spelled out somewhere?
I was going to say, you
That-
want me to
that-
do it? Because I pulled
Yeah.
it up so I could.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion to approve the preliminary plat and the PUD request, contingent on the following conditions. One being repairs to the current Linden Woods Drive. 2, I got a little wild there. 2, that the drainage issues on the southeast corner of that property are fixed and addressed before the occupancy permits are issued. And then last, that the roads are fixed with any issues in terms of sealing the cracks, stuff like that, before the city takes over. Additionally, one condition would be that the current Thomas Circle, we're going to make that, part of the agreement would be that would be made private, and that the meters in the townhomes in that area would be transferred over to a central meter that the builder is putting together and planning.
I'll second.
We good? Okay, we have a motion to second. Would you call for a vote, please?
Thomas Newsom,
Yes.
Whitney Kerr,
Yes.
Clinton Horner,
Yes.
Shane Knight,
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Thank you again for your cooperation with us. 3B, discussion, consideration, possible action on PC 2023-18, final plat request for property located near North First Avenue and Gerlach Drive. Ms. O'Neill.
This final plat request is basically to separate two lots into, or sorry, one lot into two lots. The total lot coverage is about 2.2 acres, so each lot will be right about an acre or so. So it will meet all the requirements for size requirements and all that. There is a public water line that does run through the southern lot. The plat that you guys have shows an easement on there. However, there was some confusion between the owner and the surveyor of what we got sent. So the owner does not want to have that easement on there just yet, because he wants to see what the buyer of the lot wants to do and see if they have to move that water line or not. So that's, and if they don't have to move it, then they'll go ahead and get an easement for that water line. But that was what the request was from him on that. The future land use map does have this area as commercial residential mixed use, and there's not been any comments from the public. And then that was really there wasn't really any comments from staff other than if they disturb more than an acre, they have to get a DEQ permit, but that's a state deal for everything. That is pretty much it, and it meets setbacks and everything, so, of the existing building. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. The owner's also here if you have any questions for him.
Well, I had a question about the easement. And I'm not sure that your explanation helped me any.
Okay.
I mean, not your fault, but there was a note on the survey that said the easement information was furnished by the clients, but no easement research had been done by the surveyor. But yet we show an easement on the drawing.
Right.
So that easement's just there as a hypothetical at the moment, or?
But yes, so when city staff first got the plat and reviewed it, one of the requests from Public Works was to have an easement for that water line. On the city side, we looked to also see if there's an easement on file, and that's something that we haven't been able to locate either. That was part of it, and then the applicant said, well, I want to hold off on getting any easement, because if we have to move that line, that's also going to affect the easement. So that's kind of what we talked about. He did talk with the M&O supervisor, and that seemed to be okay on that aspect of it.
And this is probably a silly question, but so on the book and page document that would be on file at the county, there's no easement documents in that?
Not that has been found at this point in time.
Okay. Okay. So this is a general question to you, but to anyone that may know here up here tonight, but is it prudent for us to approve a final plat on something that has a hypothetical easement on it, or?
What we could do is, and this is just my thought, is we could go ahead and basically go through the final plat process, but what it would do before council is have that easement removed and not show the easement, but it'll show the water line. And then once so it'll separate into two lots. But then what'll happen is whenever he goes for a building permit, it's going to have to be reviewed again by staff. And then if that water line still becomes an issue, then they'll either get an easement at that time or they'll move the water line. Is what kind of where we're at right now.
My understanding is that the easement shown on the drawing is a mistake. It should not have been presented with the easement on it.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. That helps a little. Sorry. You probably said that, but I didn't pick that up.
So it's not intended to have the easement as presented.
But there is or is not a current water line there?
There is a current water line, yes.
Where does that water line go? Because there's a whole lot of houses and businesses south of there that I'm assuming that water line is supplying.
That would be a question for our M&O supervisor, but I do not know exactly where that water line goes. It kind of runs northeast to southwest, kind of diagonally through that property, but I'm not exactly sure where it goes once it leaves the property.
It goes underneath the storage units next door.
Mr.
There you
Cantor,
go.
would you mind coming up to the mic so we can drill you with some questions and be caught on camera for YouTube. Thanks.
So the water main runs, like she said, south, west and northeast, and it goes underneath the storage units that is to the east of that property. So there has been storage units built over the top of our water line.
So should someone buy this property in the future and they want to put a building over the top of this water line, who's responsible for rerouting the water line?
Well, that's a good question, because I know we have found water lines in the past that have had easements that have been agreed upon between the property owners and the city's council at the time, and they never was filed through the county assessor's office. And so I'm almost certain this is another one of those issues. It's a 16-inch iron line, and it feeds everything south of that property.
Any other questions for staff? Thanks, appreciate it. Would the applicant like to speak?
I wouldn't, sir. I want to say thank you to Danielle and Randy, because we've been working on this for a couple of weeks trying to figure out a resolution for this. And I guess our point is there's not an easement now, and it has not been an issue. We have a real estate contract on lot 1 of that, which doesn't impact the water line at all. The second lot, we have no plans to develop or sell at this time. It's in a 10-foot piece. I don't know if you have a diagram or not, but I guess worst case is we would have to maybe reroute it into the 5-foot setback maybe, or something like that at the point we decide to develop that second lot. Like I said, we have no plans to develop that second lot. We don't want to hold up our real estate purchase on the first lot. So we're asking that the council, if they would, to go ahead and approve the replat so that we can sell lot 1, and then if it becomes an issue on lot 2, if whoever we either sell this to or decide to develop to, we address it then and say, okay, are we going to put a building anywhere near that? Maybe, maybe not. It's not an issue now. It may not be an issue then. When we get to that point, then we address it and say, okay, we either got to move it or we got to give the easement. Either way, whichever's better. But it may never be an issue. Somebody may buy it and put a building on the other side, and it never impacted. It may actually help whoever's developing that to have that water line there. We don't know yet. We don't have that data, so that's all we're asking is just your consideration. But these guys have been really great to work with, and they've helped us, answered any questions, return calls. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, appreciate it. Any questions for the applicant? Would anybody would like to speak for or against? As a matter of discussion, I would say I don't feel comfortable recommending approval without there being an easement and protecting the city's interest in investment. This is servicing a lot of folks. You know, if a water line can be moved, so can the easement at some point in time. So those are my thoughts. I see the wheels turning over there.
What is the current position of the city? I mean, is that easement tell me? I mean, I guess I'm confused. Is that water line right now even protected, or? I mean,
there's an effective easement there.
Yeah.
Now that everyone is on notice of the water line, as long as current staff is there, nobody's going to issue a building permit to build on top of the water line. The issue that I see is that I heard the landowner, and hopefully there's not an issue and we can move on and the landowner grants an easement to the city. Probably there was an easement at one time and it was filed, misfiled, or not filed or misfiled or can't be located. So my position is the same as it was when other water lines were located. The city needs to establish an easement. whether it's by agreement with the landowner, whether it's by some other method or condemnation or something, but there needs to be a recorded easement there so that the city, if there's new staff on board, or if this landowner sells the property, the next landowner, everybody knows there's an easement there. I think like I said, I think there's effectively an easement there now because there is a water line and nobody can build on top of it unless it's not known where it is and somebody on staff says, yep, we don't see a recorded easement, build your mini storages, and that's how we get stuff built on top of a 16-inch water line. And that's too big a water line to have stuff built on. So I don't know that the plat necessarily needs to be denied. I certainly wouldn't approve it in the absence of at least a demarcation of the water line, even if there's not an easement indicated. The water line, now that it's known, should at least be indicated on the plat. I
believe it is.
So I would agree that if there's not a recorded easement there, then the easement probably doesn't need to be on the plat unless at this time the landowners are conceding that the city have an easement. But if that's not the concession, then the easement probably shouldn't be noted, but just the water line itself.
Sure, come on. If you would come to the mic for us, please. Sir, if you would come to the mic, thank you, appreciate it.
Again, it doesn't impact the sale of Lot 1, and that's why we're asking for the replat. We're not asking to build on Lot 2. We're not asking to move the water line. We're not asking that that be impacted in any way. We're just saying approve the plat so that we can go ahead and do the purchase on that one property and on that one lot, and that's it. So.
Could the seller sign an agreement with the city to provide an easement once that water line is determined? Prior to, in agreeance to a final plat?
Yeah, I think this is.
Well, prior to council.
I mean, we just put some conditions on another one we approved. Can we put conditions on this one?
I don't know that this one needs conditions. There's not an easement now. I think it's okay to adopt the plat without an easement and just a note that there's a water line there. I think it shifts the burden into the city to say, wait, one of our water lines is out there without an easement.
Because the city has no protection right now, and adopting a new plat doesn't give us any, whatever protection the city has now, adopting a plat doesn't change that.
No.
It's the same, it stays the same. Yeah.
No, it could only enlarge the city.
But this would be the time to change it, though.
What's that?
This would be the time to change it and protect the city.
It would, and that would be the best. It's like the best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago, but second best time's today. So you're right. Today would be the best time to address that and obtain that easement if the property owners are willing to grant that easement. But the city can't force anybody to grant an easement. The option is the property owners grant the easement through the plat as presented here, or that easement is removed and just a demarcation of the water line. Is that the location of the water line? Do we know that's, okay. Okay. And then the city would have some responsibility later to go back and make sure that easement is obtained.
Whitney, do you have comments? Especially if they're.
No. No, this is why attorneys make a lot of money. So, it's it's an error on the city's part. It's a bad error on the city's part. At the same time, it's fixable. I mean, there's some protection that exists legally. It's just getting it sorted out. No, I mean, I don't have any problem with approving the plat. The protection that exists is not dependent on the plat. So Mr. Markham's absolutely right. There are ways to fix this that don't impact the plat. The plat doesn't change anything that isn't. It's literally just noting where the water line is, and then it's going to be up to the city to fix the problems for a water line that's not currently under an easement or condemned or, any of the remedies that might exist. So there's a number of different remedies there, but it's up to the city at this point to avail themselves of those remedies.
Yeah, if this was a new development and a new plat, I would say the city would not be in a position to accept that plat without utility easements that have been granted by the property owner. But this isn't new. This is just dividing a lot and a water line that's been there for a long time, and whether the easement was obtained at one point and not filed, which has happened before, or whatever. Certainly it's not in any way the fault of these property owners. So they're not obligated to grant an easement. They could as a part of this plat request if they wanted to, but they're not obligated to. And so I don't have a recommendation to approve or deny, but I think we could get where they want to be and where the city is legally permitted to be by adopting the plat without the easement on it, just a note of where the water line exists. And that puts subsequent purchasers on notice that there's a water line.
So in that case, should the motion contain that the water line is marked appropriately on the plat?
It already is.
Well, but we've got several versions here, so just want to make sure that it's clear what's.
Yeah, and I talked with the property owner before the meeting, and the thought is should this be recommended for approval, then the plat that council receives will not show the easement. It'll only show where the water line is. So as far as the motion, I guess it could include that to the,
I mean,
or just dictate where the water line is.
If the applicants aren't wanting to have an easement on there, then I think the motion, if this body wants to approve, is to approve the plat with the amendment that the water line easement not be shown. And then it'll be contingent upon the property owners to provide an amended plat for council to review without that easement on it.
There we go. That's clear.
There's not an easement.
So I'll make a motion to approve final plat request for property located near North First Avenue in Gerlach, with the amendment that the plat presented to council shows the placement of the water line, and not the easement, correct?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsom,
Yes.
Whitney Kerr,
Yes.
Clint Horner,
Yes.
Shane Knight,
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Motion passes, so we'll move to what are we on? 3C, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2023-19, a sketch plat request for property located near Peppernut Lane and Redbud Lane. Ms. O'Neill.
This is one that we don't see very often, but this area that is in question had the previous owner and staff has been dealing with this for over a year, since about February, March of 22. There's about 7 parcels over there that was sold off without going through any platting process or anything like that. It's been kind of a long ordeal that we've been dealing with. The seller came in to do the plat process. We instructed him of what kind of needed to happen, what needed to be done. Staff has not heard anything from the seller since April of '23. This current applicant has one of those lots and is basically just wanting to know what options do we have to move forward for these lots. The past management had made the comment that the seller needed to be the one to take care of the platting process and all that. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'll let the applicant kind of speak to anything that he may have. Some of staff's issues was there's one lot or two, depending on how you look at it, that's directly behind the lot that's in question tonight. And if this gets platted eventually, the problem then is, and you could potentially be creating an orphan lot. And so that's just something to consider as we move forward, because it does not have any access to road or anything like that. But if you have any questions, I will happily answer them, and the applicant's also here if you have questions for him.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. O'Neill?
A quick one, which may just be some semantics, but this is presented as a request for a sketch plat.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how it falls under a sketch plat process.
So in ordinances, there's a lot of ways you can go through the platting process. The sketch plat is kind of a preliminary plat, if you will, basically to get the taste of whether or not Planning Commission and Council would support such a platting request. The survey that was provided is not a plat on any level, but he wanted to see what options there were to be able to plat that, and if Planning Commission and Council would support having that piece platted or not.
And by that piece, we're talking about just this 1 acre?
Correct, just the 1 acre for Mr. Goad, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak?
I would.
If you would come to the mic for us.
Good evening. So I thank you, Danielle. I think that sums it up pretty well. I just want to be clear about a couple of things. I'm only asking for this council or this committee to consider the 1 acre lot that I own. I can't imagine that I'd be legally allowed to subdivide or plat or whatever the process is, land that I don't currently own. So I just want to make sure that's clear. She's right, this process has been going on. I purchased this land in February of 2022, and through several conversations with 2 different city managers, have gotten nowhere. Have had 30 conversations via email with Danielle, several in-person conversations, several conversations with Tom, and I'm here. I don't know what a sketch plat is. I don't know what the process is, but I'm here to try and figure out what the process is for this before I spend thousands of additional dollars on the platting process. So I'm here to try and understand, one, what the process is for this particular situation. I do feel like while this has been really much just a pain, I feel like I've been held hostage. I own land that I am not legally allowed to use, and that somehow is my fault. I believe the city has caused this issue, and I'd like to understand what we can do to try and fix this. So I'm here just to kind of pick your brains to figure out what the process is. I think if you look at what's required from a plat, the frontage is there on a city street. That shouldn't be a problem. There's enough frontage on the city street. I'm here to understand what we should try and do to move this forward. My goal tonight is to leave with actionable steps that I can do to complete this process.
Any questions?
And by complete the process, you mean?
Whatever I need to do to go through this process to be able to either sell or build on this land.
Gotcha, okay.
I do not feel comfortable selling this property knowing that the next owner will have to have this problem. I didn't want to go through it, and I
Sure.
do not want to put anyone else through this process.
Gotcha.
If I could have anything, I would say please approve the application as submitted, but I understand that's probably not a reality.
I do, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So there's currently a house on that northeast corner of that square, correct? And how is that house, how is there access to that house?
It is where you see that maple circle? That
Okay.
maple circle is a driveway.
Okay,
That leads to that property.
and does that, the square on the upper west side, is it owned by the same party?
It's owned by the seller of the original one. So the lots that you see there, the two upper,
Yep.
basically that whole square,
Okay.
including where Goats is, was the property that they originally just split off and didn't go through any process at all.
Okay.
And to be clear, they is not me.
Yes, no, it's not,
yeah.
not at all
Yeah.
Mr. Goat at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mr. President, it actually goes further than that. So if you take those top two parcels.
Yep.
And come straight south through Mr. Godes, and then
Mhm.
keep coming south,
Those two do.
Mr. Attaway is the original seller, and he owns that whole area, 15 acres. He actually owns the two parcels then coming further south on the east side.
Okay.
Right there. But, so he owned all of that, and then in early last year, he sold the 1 acre to Mr. Goad, and then he sold the parcel that's directly east of Mr. Goad, and the bigger one to the south, to some folks, I think their name is Davis.
Yes.
So they are completely without access to a public street except by an easement. Mr. Attaway granted them a narrow easement to get to their place, but they don't meet any of the frontage requirements to a public street or anything else. There's no access for public safety vehicles, for trash trucks, etc. And so Mr. Goad and I have talked about this several times, and I feel horrible for people in Mr. Goad's position, for people in the Davis's position. If there's one person that was responsible for this fiasco, and that's Mr. Attaway. He did not, I mean, our ordinance is profoundly clear that if you are dividing a parcel of a certain size, you have to plat it, and it's within the city limits, you have to plat it. And that guarantees, or that avoids the situation that both Mr. Goad and the Davises are in, of not having access to public streets, not meeting the requirements for building permits, or anything else. Now, Mr. Goat's property on its own, in a vacuum, probably does meet those. But what you end up with, if you allow that process to go forward, as to Mr. Goat's, even though it was carved off inappropriately, and Mr. Goat's was actually carved out of the middle of a single parcel. So Mr. Goat's property sits in the middle of a single parcel that ran north and south. And that 1 acre was carved out of the middle of it. So what you end up with, if you let people that get those little parcels that have been carved off, plat them, you end up with the potential of having a bunch of little orphan pieces off of that large parcel, and that's not a desirable use of property. The whole planning process is so that a large parcel will then be efficiently used and accessible and kept up. But if you carve off a bunch of little pieces and leave some orphans in the back, those aren't going to be valuable. It's not going to make sense for people to maintain them. And so you just end up with a profoundly inefficiently used parcel of property. And so conceivably Mr. Attaway has the parcel south of Mr. Goat for sale right now.
Yes.
And conceivably he could sell off the one to the north of Mr. Goat.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of that eastern property is cut off from a public street. No public street. At some point, they're gonna come in to get a building permit, we're gonna say, sorry, you don't have access to a public street, and there's no way for you to get it. Because it's not gonna make sense for the city to then condemn a public street across Mr. Goat's property, he wouldn't be excited about that, or across any of these other parcels to get back to those eastern parcels. So it's the seller, or the owner of the larger parcel that has the burden of platting this. It's the people to whom he sells that bear the brunt of it, just like Mr. Goad or the Davises. And, I don't know that the Davises have come in for a building permit, but.
That's how we found out. That's how they originally started this whole
Yeah,
process.
so they're gonna be in the same boat, and so, I wish there was a different answer, but my suggestion is the answer is to go back to Mr. Attaway and say, you sold us a piece of property that's not usable for the purpose that we bought it for. And either force Mr. Attaway to sell the whole thing to somebody that's going to efficiently use it, or to plat it himself.
So
And conceivably plat it in a way that all of the lots would have access to Peppernut. It would take some creative dividing, but it could conceivably be done. But as it stands right now, the fault is with Mr. Attaway. It's not Mr. Goad, and it's not the Davises.
Yeah, can I make a couple of comments? So I just want to say I agree with Tom in principle, but that was if this land hadn't been sold. But we're at the point where the land has been sold. Mr. Attaway no longer owns the land to plat it. So I'd argue that we are in a situation that the city needs to help us navigate out of. This is a process problem for sure. Why is someone able to sell a piece of property and record a deed with the county clerk and the city not have an opportunity to say, hey, you didn't do X, Y, and Z? And I don't think that's a problem we need to solve here.
Sure.
But I'm just saying we're in a different situation than going back to the original property seller to say, hey, fix this. I will tell you, I spoke with the surveyor that he had hired, and he said that he wouldn't talk to me because, one, he's sitting on thousands and thousands of unpaid bills, and two, he didn't want to deal with this particular issue with the city. So even the surveyor doesn't want to work on this. So again, I find myself in a situation where I'm looking for some creative guidance to get out of this problem.
And I agree. We've talked with staff, I've talked with you, I've talked with a lot of people to try to figure out a way on the front end to avoid this, other than just having an ordinance. I mean, our ordinance is maybe not well known, but it's clear on the books that if you're going to carve off pieces of a larger parcel, you have to plat it out. And Mr. Attaway didn't do that, and sometimes it's no different than if you buy a stolen pickup. You pay good money for it, but then when you go to tag it, you're gonna get a red flag and say, hey, your pickup's stolen.
I think that's a pretty unfair characterization, but I want to hand these out to you guys.
But it's an analogy that says you didn't do anything wrong, but you're getting stuck with the bill. And Mr. Attaway is the one that improperly parceled this off. And if we allow purchasers of those small lots to then go in and properly plat them so that they can build on them, we defeat the entire purpose of the platting ordinance. We might as well not have it at all and just let people
the issue,
willy-nilly parcel out their property and sell.
Yeah, and the issue that I have, and again, this is just a predicament, right? That's how we got to this situation. It's been hurry up and wait, and I've been hurry up and waiting for 18 months. And that's why I've paid the money to speak before this committee and gone through the abstract process to get all the property owners here to have this discussion. So there's got to be some sort of path forward without just saying, go sue somebody or go screw yourself.
But I think not the latter, but the former is your recourse. He sold you a piece of property that wasn't buildable, and he should bear the brunt of it, not the taxpayers. It's not the taxpayers' burden to then reconfigure and do things that allow you to build on a lot that's later, maybe not in this exact case, but potentially later going to create an area of town that has inefficient use. We've got pieces at the back that can't be used, or maintained, or sold.
Sure.
Because they don't abut a public street. And so you're right, you are the victim here. I'm not in any way saying that you did anything wrong. You're the victim here, but you're not the victim of the city. You're the victim of Mr. Attaway.
Well, I printed off this ordinance, and it, I think, categorizes this appropriately. And in my opinion, this is a get out of jail free card, or whatever you want to call it. There's got to be some sort of solution that we can come up with other than no. And again, I do, if you want to talk about the larger problem, there's a process problem here. This shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Since state statute in Title 11 that it shouldn't happen. The problem is we've had conversations with the county clerk. The county clerk refuses.
Hey, don't
I'm
get,
not yelling.
okay,
I'm
but
just
you're,
saying that the county clerk has refused to do anything about it. Cause it's happened time and time again.
it's a process problem.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's not completely on the city. Cause the city has tried to go to the county clerk and has had no luck and no way of moving forward.
Yeah, there's simply no way currently under either the statutory scheme or the city, there's no way for the city to lay eyes on a property transaction until somebody comes in for a building permit. So we've got our ordinances in place and people have to abide by them, but the only enforcement we have is when something happens and somebody comes in for a building permit. And then the city has to say no, because that transaction wasn't per the ordinance. If every transaction that happened within the city limits crossed somebody in the city's desk, and the city said, yep, that one's good, that one's good, that one's good, nope, that one doesn't comply, it would probably still be after the fact, because there's nothing that requires a property owner to come to the city before they list something for sale and say, hey, is this something?
What's changed in the last 2 years where this has been allowed to happen in the past and now it's not?
Nothing has changed, and it probably will happen in the future if the sellers don't comply with state law and with city ordinance. I don't pretend that this won't happen again. It will. So I don't think there's a great answer to it at this point, because there's just no way for the city to approve transactions before they happen.
Well, I mean, again, bigger problem. I'm just asking specifically what we can do with the 1 acre piece of property that I've submitted before this committee this evening.
And the council this body and the council can do whatever they want to do.
I agree.
That they certainly have that latitude. It's just a symptom, though, of a larger problem. And even though you're the victim here, my advice will be, don't do it for you, to the council. Because how do we not do it to the person that buys the lot to the south of you that's for sale? How do we not do it to somebody, how do we not approve theirs if we approve yours?
Right, and I almost feel like this is a litmus test to understand what the process is, because I'm not the only person that's having this problem, even outside of this particular, this area, whatever you want to call it. Maybe this is the litmus test for what happens in the future, but I don't think no is an appropriate answer. There's got to be some step, something that we can do together to figure this out. I've been told.
There is, but you don't want to do it, so, and that is to go back after Mr. Attaway.
So it's the city's opinion that even though this sale was allowed to be done, the deed was recorded, a building permit will not be issued, that there is nothing that the city is willing to do to try and move this forward for me or anyone else in a certain situation.
I can't say what the city's willing to do. I can only say
Is it
what I
your
would
advice?
recommend,
Yeah.
and that is not to do it for you, because you're no different than the other people in this position, and if we approve.
I'm the only one that's speaking up to say we have a problem.
Of course. But if we approve all of these parcels that have been improperly divided and sold, we provide no incentive to larger parcel owners to do it properly. But if they know, listen, the city's turned this down, then they have a duty. The realtors then know, hey, if I've got a landowner that's carving a small parcel out of a large one, I've got a duty then to tell this guy he can't do that. And I've got a duty to these purchasers to say, you're not gonna be able to build on this. But until the city takes that action, I don't think realtors know either, honestly.
I'd argue that this has happened for decades and it's never been a problem before.
No, it has been a problem. You can drive around town and find those problems, and find little orphan pieces of property in weirdly shaped parcels.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been a problem, and just because it hasn't been addressed before doesn't mean we should never address it. Again, I don't say anything other than you're the victim here. This is not
Yep.
your doings.
I agree.
But you're the one holding the bag now because, and it's not a bag that the city gave you. It's a bag that Mr. Attaway gave you.
Any comments from the council or the commission?
I mean, I don't know that, this is my opinion. I don't know that it's the purview of this commission to recommend how you move forward. I think we make our decisions based off of what the ordinances that we're tasked with upholding are.
Sure.
You know, in terms of how you move forward with making this happen, I don't know that I can give you that recommendation. I mean, I can see where going back to Mr. Attaway originally dividing this back in
2021.
2021. I think December 2021 is the date on the survey.
Yes.
And these ordinances that Mr. Markham is talking about were in place at that time. So, you know, I just don't feel like there's anything we can do. I mean, we've been presented with a request for a sketch plat. So I think we have the ability to vote on that.
I guess my question is, if I go spend thousands more dollars to do a sketch plat, will it be approved by this board? Because if it's not, then I'm not going to spend the money.
I can tell you that my vote would be no, but I can't speak for the other folks that are up here. And I'm in total sympathy to your situation.
Sure.
But in me looking at this and analyzing it against the ordinances, my vote for now and for the future on this same scenario would be no. Then I don't know that that helps you move forward any.
It just saves me from spending thousands of dollars on a plat, and I'll spend thousands of dollars on an
But
attorney.
I'm one of 5, and ultimately I'm
Sure.
a recommendation. The other 5 folks that sit up here a week from today are the ones that would make the
Sure.
decision.
Whitney, Clint, Drew?
So, I have a lot of thoughts.
Sure.
There's a lot of things I'm not sure that I should say at this point because the county offices have been mentioned, and just so everybody's clear, I am the legal representative for the county, so I need to.
Well, I'm the county commissioner, but I'm here on my own personal
I
business,
know.
not representing
And
anybody
truthfully,
officially.
I'm not representing you, but because the county agencies are involved, I think I need to keep my mouth shut on the public record. So I do have a lot of thoughts about it. I think this is a bad situation. I think there are some alternatives for moving forward that maybe haven't been explored, but I also think I should shut my mouth, so.
Okay.
So this survey that we're looking at has 6 tracks on it. This survey we're looking at has 6 tracks on it. Are all 6 of these, and all 6 of these tracks, Mr. Attaway still owns a number of these tracks, or they're all owned by 6
I
different?
don't know.
I believe he still owns several.
I mean, you know, I'm fairly new to this group, but my thought is one path, and again, this is my personal opinion, not speaking for the other 4 that are sitting up here with me, is if somehow the collective owners of these 6 tracks could get together and replat this in a way that makes all of these tracks viable, that may be a path. I don't know. Would that legally, would that be a path that might work?
Of course.
Yeah,
I mean, that's ultimately what's going to have to happen.
yeah.
In the long term, whether it happens now or whether it happens long term, for all of this to be.
I mean, I'm assuming that track 2, according to the survey, is okay because of the easement that allows that owner to get to their property. That's the tract on the upper northeast side.
Well, and right
No.
now, that, the whole those northern two parcels are owned by the same
Oh, okay,
entity.
okay.
So that's, but an easement doesn't get you where you need to be.
Doesn't, okay.
In a platted parcel, so you have to abut a public street. So there's going to need to be some lines redrawn or an additional public street put in. Conceivably, the lines could be redrawn and all of the owners have access to Peppernut without having to put in another public street. But right now, the Davis parcels, the larger one to the southeast there and the one above it, they don't abut a public street at all. And so there would have to be some land exchanged or something, and that might be difficult because we're right there on the map where it says sketch plat, I believe is a house, or somewhere right in there is a house. And that's the parcel that either is or was for sale recently.
So my question would be, if Tim Attaway, the south of Goad, if Davis has purchased that, they've got the road access, they replat theirs to one lot, problem solved.
Yeah,
Well, no, but it gets a lot closer. If you join the two northern lots, and the Davises bought the southwest lot, and then you plot the whole thing into 3 lots, then yes, it does.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't plat them one at a time, but yes, if you plat the entire thing as 3 lots, all 3 lots would abut the public street in sufficient width to make it appropriate.
And I guess that's where I was going. It seems like the solution is to try to figure out a way to plat all these at the same time so that they're.
Or conceivably, the Davises would just have to buy the southern 50 feet or whatever it is or
60 for
yeah. So the southern 60 feet of that currently owned Attaway parcel, and then replat it all, and they would have sufficient access to the public street. So there's ways to do it, but I think it all needs to be done with the entire parcel, not just a lot at a time.
Have you discussed anything with Mr. Attaway?
Not in 6 months or longer.
Okay.
No.
That's probably the solution. You and Davis come in there and maybe look at, see if you'll discount that lot.
Based on previous conversations, I don't think that would be fruitful, but I will try. He doesn't care at this point. He's sold the land, and it's someone else's problem.
And we have had, just so you all know, we have had applications where multiple owners came together to do some things, so it wouldn't be completely out of ordinary to do that. Just letting you know.
Go ahead. This is my dad and my realtor, so if you guys don't know, Dale.
Just a couple of thoughts here. A lot of the things that were discussed would require the property owner to do things that are outside of his control. It was suggested he come in and take this 1 acre and file a plat on it. And then the city would have it platted and it would be standalone. That's what we're looking for is advice. Is that a good way to move forward with this? This was surveyed out. It's a 1 acre. That's all he owns. He can't plat anything for the Davises. The Davises can't plat. They couldn't include this 1 acre in a plat that they do. Attaway can't do anything with any of them. Nobody has control over their own destiny in this point. So that little thing that was printed out that's part of the city code calls for an exception possibility, that if there is a lot that is of such unusual size that the strict application of the requirements contained in these regulations would result in substantial hardship or inequity, then the city council can make an exception. What we're asking for is that's a possibility. If we have a 75% vote from you recommending that to the city council can say yes or no. It's my contention that this is of such an unusual size at this point in time. That's all he owns. That's all he can do anything with. And so, we've got 1 acre. Do we really want to make a one lot, one block subdivision and set a precedent for the future doing that? We're just looking for a way to use the property. You know, I respect your comments and your thoughts, talking about inefficient use of property. Here is an acre that fronts on a city street, that has electricity to it, has telephone to it, has rural water to it. There's no city sewer available to any of these people. They do an aerobic system. Everything is there ready to build a house, except a building permit. Now, I don't see any need to file a subdivision plan on an acre that's not going to subdivide it. It's still going to be 1 lot. There's not any information that a plat would furnish. This is a plat, by the way. It's a survey boundary plat, if you read across the top of it. Any subsequent plat would not have additional information that's not on this plat. This shows the street location. Anything else that would be required, we can have it redrawn. But what will we gain by doing that? We're just looking for a simple solution. If we can request your mercy in having this considered as a variance or an exception under that section 155.025, we would appreciate your help.
I do have a question in regards to one of your comments about, you know, ability to request a building permit.
Yes,
Have
sir.
either of you requested a building permit here?
I was told that it would not be issued. I did not fill out an application. We can confirm that. We talked about that.
Yeah, because the lot's being illegally subdivided, staff cannot issue a building permit. The ordinances are clear where it says you have to have a plat or a platted piece, or it has to be a legal lot, basically.
Well,
these
and it was.
parcels were just created illegally.
It was suggested that the way to move forward would be to do this as a plat, right? A subdivision plat.
Yes, Mr. Attaway and staff have been working on trying to get it platted for over a year.
Well,
and
we can't help Mr. Attaway, and at this point, he can't help us. This is a 1 acre parcel. We can't do anything to force the neighbors to do anything. But this meets everything that's necessary to use it. So an efficient use of this would be to grant this as an exception and say, let's get on with life. Let's put a house there. Let someone live there and have an efficient use of the property.
Mr. Markham, can you speak to the difference between what is presented in terms of the survey and what the city is requiring as a plat?
Well, I think staff is right. This is presented as a sketch plat, and that's the functional equivalent of, hey, what do you guys think? I mean, it's just a floating an idea out there. So I don't know that there's anything necessarily to consider. It's almost like an information item only to discuss, because that's a sketch plat is just, hey, give us some advice. What do you think? Before we go into the efforts to put this together. Now, a 1 acre roughly square, not particularly complicated for a plat, so if this body considered it something different other than a sketch plat, I guess it could, but I don't know that there's anything to adopt or anything here. This body could recommend approval of the sketch plat, and then that would permit the property owner then to, you wouldn't have to recommend approval of it, but take some action, and then the property owner could go in front of the council with the same thing, a sketch plat, say, hey, what do you think? And open that, it effectively opens the dialogue.
And that's why we're here. We're looking for ideas. We're looking for a dialogue. We're looking for solutions. So far, we just keep hitting the wall every place we go. I do think that you can take action tonight and send this to the city council if you recommend approving this as an exception. The city council can vote on it next week, and it can be done. And it's not gonna affect the people that are landlocked. Their situation is not the same as this situation is. All of the utilities are there, the city road is there, everything is ready to go. Unfortunately, it wasn't platted properly, and, you know, we would appreciate your help in getting past this. You know, we need to get over this hurdle.
And
Thank you.
just to address Mr. Gode's statement there, I don't think this property fits within the 155.025 exception. I think you would see that if an area had developed and left an orphan piece of property, or if maybe a natural element such as a creek or a hillside or something so shaped the parcel that maybe it didn't meet the frontage requirements of the street, or the build line couldn't be far enough back, but otherwise it met the requirements. This would be a variation or an exception on a lot that was created in violation of an ordinance, affirmatively created in violation of an ordinance by the seller. And I don't think that meets what's contemplated by variation and exception.
And I respect that opinion. I don't agree. You know, bottom line, it can't be subdivided, it can't be platted anything different than what it is. So in my opinion, that meets the definition of this. The strict application of the requirements would result in substantial hardship or inequity. I feel like that's where we are. It's been dragging on for 18 months. Nobody has come up with us to do this, this, and this, and we're good. We're still here looking for a solution. So my request on behalf of my son would be that you consider this as an exception and recommend that to the city council, and let's be through with this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Markham, I do have a follow-up question for you. So I certainly understand the points that you're making, and you know, this is, you know, to Mr. Gode's point, this is somewhat of a process problem that you know, needs you know, eventual correcting. The clarifying question is it your opinion that this creates, if we were to approve a replat such as this, does this create additional liability for the city, or is it simply that we're trying to create a policy per se in how we want to move forward in treating these types of issues?
I don't know about a liability necessarily. It certainly puts, if you guys were to approve this body was to approve this, and then the council were to approve it as some sort of an exception, it certainly places a burden on future decision makers to justify a denial of this exact type of request. So if larger parcel owners start carving off pieces because it's easier, it's more convenient, it's less expensive than going in and platting, this body would have a difficult time on the next one if it's the parcel to the north. Mr. Attaway carves that off and sells that. This body would have a very difficult time saying why that person didn't meet the same consideration for an exception. And then you can see the problem that gets. Then the south parcel sells, and now you've got all the parcels along Peppernut that have sold, and this body's created exceptions for it, and has then created exactly the type of situation that the platting requirements are designed to protect against, and that's orphaned property with no access to a public street, and that property essentially then becomes valueless to anyone. And so that's the liability I see, is making exceptions rather than turning the property owner back to the person that created the problem. The city then sort of tries to do a workaround, and maybe the council thinks that's okay. Maybe you guys think that's okay, but that's the problem I see with approving this type of exception rather than forcing the landowner back to the person that created the problem. and that's the seller.
So in terms of, I hate to use the word policymaking here, but guidance, I assume by listening that you would probably advise council from this point and forward to deny such requests and send applicants back to deal with the original owners or through courts. And that's,
But my recommendation next Tuesday would be the same as it is this Tuesday. So-
I think the reason that I ask for clarification is that I think the purpose of the hearing today is to try to give guidance to the applicant.
Right.
So if that's the advice that our attorney is providing, I just want to make that's clear, is that, we're turning them back to the original seller and to find some sort of recourse through them. If not through them, then the courts. Is that the way that you would see that playing out?
I don't know any other way to, I can't advise the landowner on exactly what to do, but I don't think it's the city's burden, I don't think it's the taxpayer's burden to try to work around the violation of an ordinance by the seller. And so that's my general statement. I just don't believe it's the taxpayer's burden to work around that, whether it's this situation or any other. So, yeah, I think the recourse is against the seller that sold a piece of property in violation of the ordinance, and the purchaser can't do what the purchaser wanted to do with it.
I have a question.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, you'll just.
If you would come back up.
So, and again, we're all friends here. This is just a crappy situation. But if I go by what you're saying, I can go do a replat on any property that I don't own? I just want to make sure, because it sounds like the solution is for someone to replat all of this property, but not one person owns it. So I'm trying to understand how that's going to solve a problem. I can't replat anything other than that shaded area.
No.
And Mr. Attaway can't replat anything that he doesn't own. I can't go replat your neighborhood to see, hey, this works better for me. So I just don't understand. It sounds to me like there's still no solution.
Well, and you may not end up, and I don't know what the end result would be if you did take action against Mr. Attaway. It may be that he just has to buy your property back from you and refund your money unless he decides to plat it appropriately. But
I got a comment.
or maybe you make a claim against your title insurer. I don't.
In terms of a path forward, and I don't think that's, in my opinion, that's not through the city, but and this may be a Tom or Whitney question when it comes to land transactions, but there's nothing that would prevent these adjoining landowners from creating a plat, calling it Goat Acres, whatever you want to call it, but that you guys as landowners of all these properties creating a plat as an entity, essentially. Am I incorrect on that?
No.
I mean, they could all come together as an agreement to create a plat called whatever Peppernut Acres, whatever it may be. And I'm curious if a possible path forward for you personally might be to talk with these adjacent landowners and come up with a valid plat.
That would be the best outcome here, is that all of the current owners gather together and replat the entire 15 acres. It may
be that Mr. Attaway has to give up a 60-foot wide strip along some property edge to be able to make valid access to those other properties. Somebody that connects to the Davis property.
Yes.
I'd also argue that this body could, again, like it was suggested, approve this as an exception too. So I think there's more than one avenue here.
I think we could, but my only hiccup with that, I actually read through this today, and my only hiccup with this particular 155.025 is, it talks about modifications and requirements of design or the layout of the lots, but not, I mean, it specifically says, but not of procedure. And I think the procedure being broken is what got you to this situation to begin with.
Yeah,
Again,
you don't have a
devil's-
non-compliant lot. Your lot's
Right.
a square or a rectangle and not an odd-shaped lot, so.
I'd argue procedure, if I were to spend the money to do a final plat, then it could be approved. But again, not gonna spend the money if we're gonna sit here and deny it, so.
Yeah. Again, this is a personal opinion.
Sure.
Not a recommendation on behalf of the city, but I think my next piece of advice would be talk with these adjacent landowners and see if, you know, this original, the survey we're looking at that has all the parcels, if those current owners can come together and create a plat that is a valid plat showing access for everyone to Peppernut, then in my opinion, that seems like a no-brainer for approval. But again, that's me.
So Shane, in your opinion, the 155.025, where you mentioned the not a procedure, does that also apply to sketch plat rather than final?
Well, I think when it comes to sketch plat, I mean, I don't necessarily approve, again, I don't approve of the sketch plat presented because I don't think it's valid. I mean, I think if we approve this sketch, or if we approve some sort of exception, I mean, I can think of a couple of other scenarios exactly like this around town that, and I even went back to 2020, our ordinances from 2020, to make sure that some of these things were in place, and they were all in place. So I think we're opening up a whole can of worms, and I think we're opening up the potential for a seller to divide land and sell it off and totally usurp the platting process and put the burden on people like Mr. Goad. I think it's a bad move.
I'm gonna ask you another question just to clarify, make sure I
Sure.
understand. You said, you know, the matter of, procedure as it relates to the sketch plat, you didn't agree with the fact that.
Oh, I don't mean the procedure of the sketch plat process itself. I'm reading that in terms of procedure for land division or land development, whatever we call that.
Thanks for the clarification.
I think the procedure of how we develop and divide land is how I'm reading that.
Thanks.
Not administrative, but policy.
Well, I mean, I think it comes to administrative, you know, but again, I think the burden is on, you know, the sellers, the realtors, the title companies, the abstractors, you know, those.
I think that's a valid point. I think some education is certainly in order from the city to the people you just mentioned.
Oh, absolutely.
Because none of them are aware of that.
Yeah.
You know, here again, we're looking for a solution, a way to move forward. In an ideal world, we get all 16 neighboring people together and everybody says, yeah, let's do a plat, and we'll do it tomorrow. That's not an ideal solution for one property owner that owns 1 acre. So here we are, he owns 1 acre. What do we do with it? How do we get from that situation, however we got here? Part of the function of the city is to help its residents to have quiet enjoyment of life. We're asking for you to help us find a way to do that on this 1 acre. How do we quietly enjoy that without having to invoke the whole neighborhood? I don't see that happening.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I think the platting process that Mr. Goad is trying to go through now to potentially gain a building permit is not very different from the platting process of all 6 of these lots being created into a plat.
Okay. Again, all we can plat is what is owned. So if we have that 1 acre platted, is that going to be acceptable?
So One thing that I will mention, and this is more of a general commentary, not necessarily what should or shouldn't be done in any particular situation, but there's been kind of this broad discussion of either going back against Mr. Atterbury or Attaway or whatever, or everybody joining together and submitting a plat. There's actually another procedure that's out there, where he could unilaterally, and he could include any number of parties in a potential lawsuit. And I know that's not really what he's wanting to do, but the district court does have the power to essentially enforce or replat property so that it falls the way it's supposed to. I mean, the district court can fix this, even to some extent, if the city's not agreeing with it. So we've talked about some other procedures and other ways forward. I would just note that that is a potential way forward if the city's not in agreement with doing something different. So, meaning if the city's not willing to go along with a replat, not willing to accept a plat specifically from him, there is another alternative out there. There's a procedure to fix it that's above and beyond either everybody forming a big happy family or forcing Mr. Attaway to fix what he did.
I guess we're looking for a solution that doesn't involve the courthouse.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I don't think the ordinances have been consistently, uniformly applied through the years. And so, we're not looking to set a precedent, but in my opinion, if there is a piece of property that meets all of the requirements, maybe that would be a good precedent. Say, yes, we will issue a building permit on a piece of property that meets all the requirements. If it needs to be platted, this little 1 acre, here again, do we want to start a precedent that we're going to have 1 lot, 1 block, 1 acre subdivisions all over town? I don't see that being any more ideal than saying, all right, we could make an exception. This is an unusual size, 1 acre. It doesn't really fit doing a subdivision plat. We're not going to subdivide it. Let's make an exception, say we will accept this as a legitimate building site. Be our request. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for or against?
Thank you all.
Thanks. Any further discussion?
I think this is an unfortunate situation, and this is meant to be very general discussion, but I think this is an unfortunate situation. I will say the law favors the most efficient possible use of property that we can have. In an ideal world, that would include the back pieces, the front pieces, all the pieces of the property, but sometimes, because of the way things come down, sometimes legally that can't happen. Mr. Markham makes some good arguments about those back pieces of property. At the same time, in my perspective, I don't know that I think that that's Mr. Gode's problem. I think that that may be a problem that belongs to those property owners and the people that bought that property. I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say, Mr. Gode, you're the one that has to answer for the wrong that was done to these back pieces of property. And I'm not sure that that's legally the most efficient way to deal with his particular piece of property. At the same time, the city absolutely has an interest in not having people come in and do exactly this. And Mr. Markham is also completely right in that he says if you make an exception in one case, you've got to be consistent with that exception going forward, which is also not fair to the neighbors. That's not fair to anybody else in this process. So, I mean, we are in a catch-22 here where it's not Mr. Gode's fault. This is not an acceptable situation for him with this particular piece of property, but at the same time, I'm not sure that the city, I don't think the recommendation from the city attorney is going to be for the city to fix it. I'm not sure that it is even incumbent on the city to fix it at this point. So it's a bad situation. A whole lot of issues, and this is not to be trite, but this is one of those things that everybody's precluded from giving legal advice on what he shouldn't do, which way he should go. at least 4 potential ways, 5 potential ways to fix this situation. But which of those 5 ways anybody wants to pursue is kind of a guess. But it's a bad situation.
Any other comments? I definitely, would like to say, first and foremost, I absolutely sympathize with the stress, the time that it's taken to even get to this point. You mentioned the word, you felt hostage. I do feel like that's a inappropriate place to be. I completely understand your frustration. I do also think that it is a good time for the city to determine how we want to handle cases like this, because there are more coming, not just in this square, but in some other examples that we've seen and heard of recently. So this is a good time if we're going to create guidelines and policy. This is a good time for city attorney and city council to give us direction and guidance on how we need to proceed. So I do appreciate your patience and willing to visit with us.
I do have a question. I'm sorry. My mind's turning and I didn't want to cut you off. So if you want to finish, then I'll
go ahead. So
I go back to discussions we've had about how this group is an advisory group. Everything we do goes to the city council meeting, and we don't need to get into where I stand on how I feel about that, but I guess my question is, do we have to take some sort of action? If we take no action on this, does Mr. Goad not have the ability then to bring this before council? Are we the ones that give him? Are we his path for him to get an opinion from city council on this? Since they are the ones that will ultimately have to make a decision one way or the other. Because I guess what I'm trying to say is I just, I appreciate all this conversation, but part of me is thinking that because of the way that we are formed as an advisory group, I would be open to giving Mr. Goad a path to having this same discussion with the city council.
So whether we vote yes or no, he still goes to council.
But if we don't vote at all, he doesn't go to council. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Normally on anything that has no action taken by the planning commission, it does not go to council. Basically, whenever no action is taken, that sets them back at the very beginning of it, and they have to go through whatever process again. So if you did Tom may correct me, but if we did a recommended one way or the other, then it triggers going to council. That's how we handle it.
And I think that's right. And if you look at the sketch plat definition in the code, it says it's a sketch preparatory to the preliminary plat or final plat to enable the property owner to save time and expense in reaching a general agreement with the planning commission and city council. So I think that because of that, it still needs to follow the process, and then no action doesn't get him to the council agenda, but an up or down vote.
I guess, and then again, speaking from where I'm standing, I know the conversation would be much the same, and I respect the city attorney's recommendation, and I'm not arguing with that at all. I kind of feel like that given the nature of this situation and the nature of how we operate as a commission, as an advisory board, and the fact that our city council, rightfully or wrongfully so, makes the final decisions on planning and platting, that I kind of feel like Mr. Goad should have an opportunity to have a discussion with him, honestly.
And any vote gets him there.
Yeah, that's my point.
So.
Again, I think at this point it is more of a matter of procedure and how the city wants to handle issues like this. I certainly understand your arguments and desire and need to move forward, and getting an answer one way or the other is moving forward. So to your point, holding them up is not helpful. But I do appreciate you allowing us to use this case as an example for discussion.
And just to be clear, I appreciate everyone's opinion, whether I agree with it or not. This is a litmus test, and I totally am okay with that. So, again, any frustration I have is not directed at any one person. It's a generalized frustration with the process. So, again, just want to say thank you.
Thank you for that, and we share your frustration.
Sure.
Yep. Any other comments, discussion? Is there a motion?
I know that the applicants, I hope he understands my intent here. I'm going to make a motion to deny in order for this commission to take action so that it gets in front of the city council.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsom,
Yes.
Whitney Kerr,
Abstain.
Clint Horner,
Yes.
Shane Knight,
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Thank you both. Three D, discussion, consideration, and possible action on PC 2023-20, a replat request for property near Maxey Drive and Wilson Street. Ms. O'Neill.
So this property is, they're basically wanting to redraw the current lot lines. There is 2 lots there, and it's gonna remain as 2 lots. But what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to have one lot to be where it's out of the floodplain, and the other lot would be in the floodplain completely. This is approximately 2 acres. Each of them would again wind up being about 1 acre apiece. They do meet the lot size requirements. The only comments that was made by staff is that when they get to that point of getting a building permit, that all current setback requirements are met, and the driveway would have to be a sealed surface. Once they get to the permitting process again, and fire code and all that would have to be met. But the future land use map does have this as low to medium residential, so it is generally in line. We'd have not had any calls or comments from the public as well. So staff did sign off on this one for approval. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. A representative for the applicant's also here if you have questions for him.
Thank you. May take a pause for just a second. Can we get some IT help just real quick? I think we got logged off of the website. Mr. Horner did. Can you help us get back on? And if we could take a conversation in the hall, I think that would help distraction, please. Thank you.
Uh, Just in looking at this, Danielle, so that I can make sure I'm clear at what I'm looking at as well. This, there were 2 lots here.
Mm-hmm.
One was a small, formerly called Lot 4,
Yes.
and the other was this sort of upside down L-shaped piece.
Yes. Yep.
And the idea is just that overall boundary is remaining the same,
Correct.
unchanged. We're just changing the division.
Just changing that
between
middle
what
line.
was Lot 4 and
Yep,
Lot 5.
correct,
Okay.
yeah. The essential piece of this is basically kind of making it a little cleaner for development, if you will, but also
Oh,
at the
yeah,
same
right.
time,
Yeah.
getting it to where you have a lot in the floodplain. Dealing with FEMA and floodplain stuff is never easy for development, so
Yes.
by creating it 1 lot outside of the floodplain, you'll have a buildable lot that will not have any issues moving forward.
Any further questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak?
I'll answer any questions.
We could probably come up with some.
Yeah, now
Save the easiest
listen,
one for last.
you know the policy and procedure, you got to come up to the lectern.
Yes, both of them will have access to Maxey. Maxey makes kind of a,
Yeah, okay. So
And then
Maxey and
Wilson.
Wilson are the 2 street accesses?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
we're looking at the, what is that, northeast corner of, I
Wilson
guess,
and Maxey.
Maxey and Maxey,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
on that
'cause-
circle,
Yeah.
which both ties into Wilson. Mr. Kenyon, would you mind speaking to just the rationale behind why you want to split it and,
Yes.
where you chose to draw the lines?
We chose to, that originally Lot 4 wasn't big enough to, for the development, and wasn't a big enough footprint, so we wanted to enlarge the lot size that's outside the floodplain. So it changed on the replat. It changed from Lot 4 and 5 to Lot 5A and 5B, I believe. So 5A is going to be the lot that's outside the floodplain, and 5B will be in the floodplain. Just allows a bigger footprint for development.
Excuse me, is there any intention on 5B that's different than 5A, or are you using that for the same purpose? Meaning one lot versus two.
So basically 5B is just going to be yard space. It has its floodplain. It has a drainage ditch going through it, but it'll be just an extension of a yard.
Did you do any research on if there were any different species of beetles, or?
The surveyor told me that you can get snake bit, you can get stung by spiders, you can get, he also thinks there is some coyote pups, and he, named the time of rut and the time they were there surveying, so it gave a good age range on them. They could hear them whimpering while he was down there driving some stakes, so.
It's getting deeper than I intended.
So they'll all be protected. They all live in the floodplain, so they won't be disturbed.
Will any trees be cut down? I'm a tree hugger.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be.
No more than necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions for Mr. Keener? Thank you.
Yep,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Is there anyone who'd like to speak for or against? Anybody for or against? Any discussion? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
A second.
We have a motion to second. Call for a vote, please.
Thomas Newsom,
Yes.
Whitney Kerr,
Yes.
Clinton Horner,
Yes.
Shane Knight,
Yes.
Drew Jackson.
Yes. Any new business? We have a motion for adjournment?
Motion
moved.
for adjourn. Yep.
Not all at once.